Another victory for President Trump. Apparently, University of Pennsylvania has now stripped swimmer Lia Thomas of his titles. So you'll recall that Lia Thomas was a man who raced against a bunch of women and set a bunch of records. Well, now the University of Pennsylvania is going to strip Lia Thomas of his swimming titles because they're pointing out, along with the Trump administration, that dudes racing against ladies don't win titles. The university will issue formal apologies to every biological female competitor who lost out to a transgender competitor, according to the New York Post, following an investigation by the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights. That probe found that UPenn violated Title IX by allowing a male to compete in female athletic programs and occupy female-only intimate facilities. And of course, we've talked with Riley Gaines on the program before. We've also talked about UPenn swimmer Paula Scanlon. She, of course, first appeared anonymously in What is a Woman to discuss what it was like having to be in a locker room with a full-grown male with full twig and berries, Lia Thomas. And then we actually talked about who Paula Scanlon was, right? Daily Wire allowed her to publicly come out as the person who was talking in the video. She became a very public advocate for female sports. This is a big win for Paula Scanlon, big win for Riley. Here is Paula Scanlon describing.
You know, this announcement has actually come at a really interesting time for me because it was July 2 years ago that I quit my full-time corporate America job to enter the political world, to focus on lobbying for legislation, to keep men out of women's sports, to posting on X that many people have probably seen me do. And it really shows how far we've come. I think we forget what the climate was actually like back in 2021 when I was going through it. What the climate was like when I was anonymous in the What is a Woman documentary because I feared the University of Pennsylvania was going to revoke my diploma if they figured out that it was me in that film. I mean, it shows how much we've really won on the culture here. And I'm so grateful to be part of that, but I'm really grateful for all the wonderful people that have been part of this process. And I think for me, this entire outcome is really just reflecting on that and reflecting on all the friendships I've made along the way and all the wonderful creators that have worked on bringing awareness to this. And really, I'm so appreciative for you guys at the Daily Wire for being part of this and for, highlighting my story back then 2 years ago when I came public for the first time, or even making the What is a Woman documentary altogether back when it was in Joe Biden's America and no one wanted to talk about this issue. And I think more than anything else, this is just the beginning. I want to see more wins. And I'm grateful to the Trump administration for really taking leadership on this and getting this done. And I can't wait to see more of these Ivy League institutions bend the knee to this administration because that is exactly what I'm looking for. And it really makes me so happy as a female athlete. And the last thing I'll end with is I really want no female athlete to go through what I did, and that's exactly why we fought so hard for this.
Again, good for Paula Scanlon, good for Riley Gaines, and of course, Daily Wire was very involved in this particular victory. Meanwhile, the university has completely exposed themselves. The university system, they've completely exposed themselves. A shocking story from the Washington Free Beacon about Columbia President Claire Shipman. Apparently, before she became acting president of Columbia University, Shipman argued that Columbia needed to get, quote, an Arab on our board and suggested that a Jewish trustee should be removed over her pro-Israel advocacy, according to text messages obtained by the House Committee on Education and Workforce. She wrote on January 17th, 2024, "We need to get somebody from the Middle East or who is Arab on our board. Quickly, I think. Somehow." Then she told a colleague that Shoshana Shendelman, who is one of the board members who doesn't like campus anti-Semitism, which was rife at Columbia University, had been, quote, extraordinarily unhelpful, adding, "I just don't think she should be on the board." Amazing, amazing stuff. Well, those messages were included in a letter sent to Columbia on Tuesday by committee chair, Representative Tim Walberg of Michigan, as well as Representative Elise Stefanik. Addressing Shipman by name, the committee requested clarifications on the attached correspondence. The remark about needing an Arab board member, quote, raises troubling questions regarding Columbia's priorities just months after the October 7th attack, the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. Were Columbia to appoint someone to the board specifically because of their national origin, it would implicate Title VI concerns. The exchanges about Shendelman, they say, quote, raise the question of why you appear to be in favor of removing one of the board's most outspoken Jewish advocates at a time when Columbia students were facing a shocking level of fear and hostility. Well, the answer, of course, is because the left is always going to side with the scavengers in any battle between lions and scavengers, always and forever. And the Democratic Party is now the party of the scavengers. CNN's Harry Enton did a report just yesterday about the shift in the Democratic Party on the question of Israel versus the Palestinians. Now remember, Israel is a multi-ethnic, multiracial, and yes, multi-religious democracy. The Palestinians are governed by a terrorist group, Hamas in the Gaza Strip, another terrorist group, the Palestinian Authority in Judea and Samaria. By every polling statistic, they supported October 7th. They support high levels of terrorism. They hate America by all available polling. And yet somehow Democrats are more sympathetic to Palestinians than Israelis, according to Harry Enton.
In 2017, the Democratic Party was a pro-Israeli party. Look at this. They sympathized with the Israelis by 13 points, more with the Israelis than the Palestinians. But look at this sea change. Now Democrats sympathize more with the Palestinians by 43 points. Oh my God, that is a change in the margin of 56 points over the course of just 8 years. So all of a sudden, it's the pro-Palestinian position that actually reigns supreme in Democratic politics, not the Israeli position. And that is part of the reason why Mamdani was able to do so well in this primary, because those attacks over Israel, simply put, did not ring true for Democrats. They're now on the side of the Palestinians, not the Israelis.
Well, again, I do not think that that is a coincidence. I do not find that shocking in the slightest, like at all. The same party, only 36% of whom say they are proud to be Americans, is the party that likes the Palestinians, because it's all the same thing. It is all a hatred of a generalized Western civilization they feel victimizes them and all the marginalized people who comprise their coalition. This is why they like Zohran Mamdani. Again, people who are analyzing Zohran Mamdani's win in the New York City Democratic mayoral primary and saying that they can't understand how he overcame his hatred for Israel and his obvious dislike for Jews. Those same people, those same exact people, are getting it totally wrong. That was a feature, not a bug. He was running for the heart of the Democratic Party. Democrats are fighting a rearguard losing battle against their radical base. And meanwhile, there are some nice spring signs that perhaps the tariff war is coming to a bit of an end here. One of those is that President Trump has apparently now come to an agreement with Vietnam. In return for the U.S. and Vietnam striking a tariff deal that sees American goods enter the country completely duty-free, the U.S. will charge 20% tariffs on Vietnamese goods instead of the 46% tariffs he had announced in April before putting the duties on pause to allow for negotiations. Additionally, goods from other countries that pass through Vietnam on their way to the United States will be charged a higher 40% tariff, according to President Trump. Those would presumably be Chinese goods that get shipped through Vietnam. Those sorts of transshipments will still be taxed at 40%. Now, again, you'll notice that those tariff rates are not reciprocal, and that is still increasing prices on the American consumer. This is the reason why Jerome Powell is holding off on lowering those interest rates, is because if you have a 20% tariff on Vietnamese goods, and if you have a 10% tariff on UK goods, and a 30% tariff on Canadian goods, and all the rest, eventually that is going to make its way into the markets. The agreements do mark the second trade pact that Trump has struck under the threat of his so-called reciprocal tariffs. Now, again, they were put on pause in early April for 90 days. We are reaching the end of that time period. I would assume that President Trump is going to delay that still further. There are some countries that are slow to come to the table, including Japan. According to the Wall Street Journal, after failing to cut a trade deal with Japan following weeks of talks, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer decided to turn up the pressure. When Japanese officials arrived in Washington in late May, Lutnick and Greer warned them if the two sides couldn't work out an agreement soon, the conversations might start shifting from easing the tariffs Trump had recently imposed toward additional punitive measures. The Japanese stood their ground. They told the Americans they would not agree to any deal that preserves President Trump's 25% automotive tariff. That impasse continues. And on Monday, President Trump appeared to cut off talks with Tokyo. He said Japan won't take our rice, but they have a massive rice shortage. Japan imports hundreds of thousands of tons of U.S. rice annually under a WTO agreement, by the way. President Trump suggested what a letter to Japan might say. Dear Mr. Japan, here's the story. You're going to pay a 25% tariff on your cars, so we give Japan no cars. They won't take our cars. So I asked our friends and sponsors over at Perplexity about American-Japanese trade. And what Perplexity says is that in 2022, U.S. exports to Japan totaled approximately $80 billion. Imports from Japan were about $150 billion. More recently, in April 2025, U.S. exports to Japan reached $6.83 billion. That is an increase from April 2024. We have a persistent trade deficit with Japan. In 2022, that trade deficit was $68 billion. In 2024, it was again about $68 billion. Monthly data for early 2025 indicate the U.S. trade deficit on goods with Japan fluctuating between $6 billion and $7 billion per month. So again, they are a major trade partner of the United States. Is this good for American consumers? Probably not. We can hope for more trade agreements because, again, if you want a robust American economy, you do need export markets. And, again, when people buy American goods, or when we buy Japanese goods, American dollars go to Japan, and then they use those dollars to invest in American products, including on our stock market. Trade deficits usually mean capital surpluses. Okay, so, again, the trade war is not going to be particularly good for the American economy. Sure, we're picking up some tariff income from American consumers because, of course, we're the ones who end up paying the bill for that. But with that said, hopefully we come to the end, something like a reasonable trade policy. That is presumably what Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has been pursuing. As I've said from the beginning, listen to the Treasury Secretary on this stuff. He's the one who knows what he's doing. Now, meanwhile, a couple more victories for President Trump. So Paramount has now agreed to pay $16 million to settle a lawsuit from President Trump. That lawsuit was based on Trump suing 60 Minutes for basically cutting apart a Kamala Harris interview during the last election cycle in order to make her look better. The settlement does not include an apology from 60 Minutes, but it comprises payments made to the president's future presidential library and legal fees. Paramount also agreed that 60 Minutes would release transcripts of interviews with presidential candidates in the future after they had aired. Again, the goal of this particular settlement was to get more transparency from CBS and Paramount. CBS News settled. CBS said the broadcast was not doctored or deceitful. Now, there are a bunch of members of CBS News who have left in the interim during all of this because many Paramount leaders were concerned that that might expose directors and officers to liability and potential future shareholder litigation or even to criminal charges for bribing a public official. But there was also concern that if the Trump administration didn't get what it wanted here, there might be an attempt by the FCC to block some sort of merger between Paramount and Skydance. So again, I don't like the government being used this way, frankly. With that said, was the 60 Minutes attempt to make Kamala Harris look better absolutely corrupt? It absolutely was. I'm not sure there's a legal remedy for that that's appropriate, but CBS News settling is, just as a descriptive matter, a victory for President Trump. Well, that's all for now, folks. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts down below. Be sure to check out all of the other great content on my channel. I'll see you here next time.